Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Chee-Tash. My name is Chris, and today we're going to be talking about the book The Clean Coder by Uncle Bob, Robert C. Martin. Today, talking about time management. If you guys remember, last time we talked about Chapter 8 and some testing strategies. We talked about how the role of QA should function. We talked about unit tests and component tests, and we talked about the hierarchy of the testing pyramid. You have unit tests at the bottom, and then you have, integration tests, system tests, exploratory tests, and we talked about as you go up the pyramid, you have more people understanding or doing the tests, and they cover less and less. So that was last time. Go back and check out that video. Today we're going to talk about time management, which is something that I always struggle with sometimes, but there's a great book we did for the channel. It's called The One Thing. And if there's one thing I can tell you about time management, it's that your time and your focus is like a battery. And that's what the guy in The One Thing talked about, Gary Keller was the author. And he talks about how your focus is like a phone battery, and it drains during the day, and then you have to recharge it. And I would always think of focus as like, hey, I just don't have it. Like, so we all have the ability to focus, but we also have the ability to lose focus. So it's not like one person has it over the other. We all have it and we can all utilize it, but then we all need to recharge it at some point. And that's kind of what Uncle Bob says here in this book, among a lot of other points as well. So Uncle Bob here starts off the chapter saying, you got to keep your head above water when it comes to your workday, because 8 hours is not that long. And you have a lot of opportunities for distractions. So what Uncle Bob did was he would go to work early just so he can get to work and then plan out his day. And he would leave gaps where he could have interruptions. Sorry about that. And he would push everything to those 15-minute blocks, which he planned out during his day, which he can, answer emails, return phone calls, what have you. But the thing is, he woke up early to do this. So if people work, maybe like a typical 9 to 5, he woke up earlier to do this. And is that doable every single day? Is it doable to wake up super early? I woke up super early today because I had to make an airport drop off. But is that doable every single day? I don't know. I don't know if it's doable every single day. So there's things that you can do throughout the day to mitigate distractions and to focus on your work, that you don't have to show up or code in like the off hours where nobody's bothering you and all you have is yourself, right? There's things you can do. So one of the things he talks about are meetings, and he says the two characteristics of meetings are that they are necessary and that they are huge time wasters. And they cost a lot of money because you're putting your resources and paying them to be in a place where work is not necessarily maybe getting done in a meeting. So it costs a lot. Uncle Bob says that professionals don't attend meetings. And I think here, I'm going to even add a note here to say professionals don't attend meetings they don't need to attend. And that's what it comes down to is Uncle Bob says if a meeting doesn't have an immediate or significant benefit, then you don't attend. Because you have high priority work. You have releases you need to get out. You have bugs you need to fix, etc. You have other high priority work. If you do not need to be in that meeting, then you don't go to that meeting. You decline that meeting. And there's ways to do it. You don't just blow them off completely. You don't just say, hey, F this meeting, I'm not going to go. No, there's ways to go about it. And there's certain ways to decline an invitation. But ultimately, again, if a meeting's not important, if you have other high priority work, then you don't go to that meeting. And the number one question to ask here, Uncle Bob says, is your attendance necessary? Your job, is it necessary for your work? If it is, then you attend. Because ultimately your priority is your project. And there's a saying that my dad used to tell me. It's from a Stephen Covey book. You guys know Stephen Covey, the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He has another book called First Things First. You put your first things first. You keep your main thing the main thing. And if you're having trouble with understanding if, hey, should I attend this meeting or not, then you have like the team or the supervisor help you in making your decision. Maybe you say, you know what, I got a lot of work. I can't attend this meeting. But your immediate supervisor says, you know what, Chris, actually, we do kind of need you in this interview. We need you to explain this one thing to the stakeholders on the progress on that one feature that we're working on. And then maybe you come up with a plan there and say, okay, I'll only stay for the first 15 minutes where we are discussing that particular feature, and then I'm going to drop off. Something like that. Now, leaving a meeting. So you can decline meetings in the beginning, like before they start. But what if you're in a meeting, and what if that meeting starts to get boring? And Uncle Bob says in those situations, you just got to leave. You just got to leave. And there's, again, no need to be rude about it. No need to come off mute and say, hey, this meeting sucks. I got work to do. I'm leaving. There's no reason to do that. But just politely ask, hey, is my presence here still necessary to the task at hand? And if it's not, then you can drop off from that meeting. Especially, in today's day and age with Zoom calls and Teams meetings. Yeah, you can drop off. You can drop off from that meeting. That's fine. It's unprofessional to waste time in a meeting, ultimately, is what Uncle Bob says. So how do you mitigate these things? Make sure if you are going to have a meeting, have an agenda and a goal. Make sure you know what's going to be discussed ahead of time. You get a clear agenda, the topics, and then the time. And try not to go over the time. In fact, don't go over the time, or don't stray too far away from the topics. We do this a lot in some of our meetings, especially in stand-ups. People will start to ask questions and say, oh yeah, I need help with this. Oh, did you try this? Hey, guys, we're getting a little off track. Let's take this offline. That's usually how that goes. And speaking of stand-ups, the next slide. Stand-ups are part of the Agile Manifesto, the Agile Canon. So stand-ups are pretty much simply answering these 3 questions. And the whole point of it is that you are standing around in a room, I guess, in today's work from home, remote work age, you kind of lose this sense in a little bit, but the whole point is, hey, this meeting should go by fast. We should just stand. So there is like a sense of urgency. At least that's my interpretation of it. So in stand-ups, you're asking yourself, what did I do yesterday? What am I going to do today? And what is in my way? And Uncle Bob says these 3 questions should take very little time to answer. No more than 20 seconds each, leaving 1 minute total per person. So these meetings should be super, super small, your stand-ups. And I know my team is a big team. I have a pretty big team. So our stand-ups run like half an hour sometimes. And that's just because the team is very big, but we all try to adhere to the standard 3 questions, answering those 3 questions and keeping it very short. To continue along this agile path, so you have your stand-ups every day, and then you have your iteration planning meetings. I would say, when are we having these? We have these once a week, I guess, sprint planning. But essentially what this is, iteration planning, sprint planning, is where you select items in your backlog that will enter the next sprint. So you're in your current sprint, you're selecting items to go into the next sprint. And these meetings should be super smooth because estimates should already be done for the candidate items. So the items in your backlog should already be pointed or the estimates for work should already be in the story. If you're a real slam dunk, go-getter team, then you should have tests written. The business value should be in the story. The requirements should be in the story. And all that should be done. So this meeting should be super, super smooth, is what Uncle Bob says. And every story that you talk about should really take no more than 5 to 10 minutes. 5 to 10 minutes. And then you're having those pretty much, we do them on a weekly basis. Yeah, weekly basis. And I think sprint planning for us, we reserve like about an hour for that. Now, you also have retrospectives and demos. So a retrospective is at the end of each sprint, you kind of talk about what went well, what didn't go well, and how we can improve. And you can combine this with demo. Now, we personally don't. We give like an hour to our retrospective, and it's literally just an entire hour of feedback session. We do an icebreaker. We do sticky notes on a mirror board. So we give, 10, 15 minutes to write out what went well, what didn't go well, etc. And then after that is up, we spend the rest of the time talking about each sticky note. But here, Uncle Bob combines it, which I guess is fine too. You do 20 minutes for a quick retro, and then you spend 45 minutes total, but 25 minutes on a demo of all the work that you did last sprint to stakeholders. So those meetings might be important for you to attend as a developer. Especially too, you have other sessions like, you have grooming, where you actually point out news stories and you assign estimates to those. Like I said, you have demos. Maybe you have, we have like a sprint collaboration session where we talk about the upcoming sprint and what to expect for it. So stuff like that might be good for you to attend, so you know what's coming up in the pipeline. You know what's coming up and what work is out there, or what work you need to groom and get ready for the next sprint, or you need to understand what we can do differently in the sprints in the future. Those might be important to attend, but also to keep in mind that they should have a clear agenda, goal, and clear time. And if it's wasting your time, kindly leave. Arguments and disagreements can lead to a lot of time and energy being spent in places where it shouldn't. Uncle Bob has this quote in the book: any argument that can't be settled in 5 minutes can't be settled by arguing, which basically says, hey, if you can't settle it in 5 minutes, then just move on. Move on, and there's no point of arguing, because you're just arguing from more of your religious standpoint. Like, you're just arguing to argue, and you're not arguing with facts. Because if facts were introduced, then you would have an end to the argument. If you had facts and data to back stuff up, then okay, both parties should be able to agree. And he calls this like a religious versus factual debate or argument. Data will always win in an argument. If you say, hey, we're going to go this route because last quarter we saw a 50% reduction in cost when we went this route. Okay, you got data, the other person doesn't. We're going to go with the data. Data will always overrule force of will. And maybe not in the beginning. Maybe you can get people to bend to your will just by yelling and screaming and getting in their face, but that'll only work for so long before data comes in and will trump your force of will and your loud and boisterous attitude on, no, it's my way or the highway. The one thing, though, is if a debate is settled, if an argument or if an agreement is reached, please engage. Whatever path you're taking, if you're arguing with somebody, don't waste more of your time. And don't be passive-aggressive about it and try to sabotage the path forward. So you're arguing with somebody, you decide to go with the other person's solution, and then you don't even engage in the solution. You're like, you know what? I didn't get my way, so to hell with their way. They can do it, but I'm not going to participate in it. Uncle Bob says that that's sabotage and that leads to, negative outcomes for your team. One other way to settle things like this is just to do a coin flip to settle disagreements, especially if they're not based in anything factual. If it's just like personal preferences, just do a coin flip. All right, we're going this way. That's that. Move on. Focus. So this is kind of what I was talking about earlier with the book, The One Thing, where he talks about your focus on your one thing is kind of like a battery charger or a cell phone battery. So Uncle Bob has a similar principle here where he says focus is a resource that has a battery life, and every once in a while you need to recharge it. And it's something that we all have, but it's a decaying resource. So if you wake up in the morning, you have a ton of focus, and if you, I don't use it to play video games, or not saying video games are bad, but if you have other high priority work to do and you spend all that focus in one area, you're not going to have it in another area. Or if you just don't even use that focus and you lounge around all day, that focus drains. That focus does drain even when you don't use it, I think, is what he's getting at here. So if you don't use it, you will lose it. That's the bullet point that I have there. And that's the thing, too. If you spend it all in other areas, if you spend it all in a meeting, you spend it all arguing with somebody, you spend it all fighting with customer service, you spend it all walking even, you're going to spend it. You're going to spend it. Anything can suck your focus away, and you just have to be mindful of what it is that is taking up your time, and should you be putting that time elsewhere. Couple other little tidbits here about sleep. Sleep is great for focus. I find myself focus a lot better if I can get a good night's sleep, and not necessarily 7 to 8 hours, although yes, that's 100% ideal, if not longer. Waking up without an alarm, super great. But I find if I can just get to bed early, or not necessarily early, but get to bed fast and stay asleep, that helps too. Even if I don't get my 7 hours, like if I only get like 5 or 6, as long as I've stayed asleep for that entire time, then I find myself having at least a little bit of focus for the next day, some quality focus. Caffeine, be careful with too much. It's a tool, but you can abuse the tool. I had some caffeine this morning. I had some green tea, and it's got a little bit of caffeine in it. But you got to be careful with too much, because then that can cause jitters, and it could cause you to hyper focus on the wrong things. It could just leave you treadmilling, or like being on a hamster wheel. You just have so much energy that you don't know what to do with it, or you put it towards something that doesn't even need that energy. Recharging, so when your focus depletes, you spend like a good hour and a half, 2 hours on a task, you're still trying to figure it out, you need a recharge. You start to feel like your code's starting to slip, starting to make some mistakes in your IDE. Okay, maybe it might be time to recharge. Step away from the computer, go take a walk, talk with somebody, meditate. You can listen to a podcast, nap, watch YouTube. That's what I do. Although I nap too, and I take a lot of walks as well. So all of these are very, very viable solutions to that. Can't force focus. Can't force focus. So if you find yourself, being sluggish, not really understand what it's going on, hey, a good indicator is if you're in a meeting and you're super distracted and you don't even know what's going on, hey, okay, it might be time. Well, in that case, maybe it's not the right meeting for you to be in, but you know what I'm saying. If you find yourself not paying attention to the task at hand, might be time to recharge that focus. So it's not just mental focus or intellectual focus, it's muscle focus too. And Uncle Bob is a big advocate for this. I mean, just taking a small walk, but even more high intensity exercise, going to the gym. Uncle Bob likes to ride bikes. I like to do martial arts, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. Something that's just doesn't involve your brain power too much. It involves your muscles and getting your muscles activated. And Uncle Bob says when you do that, you increase your capacity for mental focus. Another little thing, and he's talked about this before in earlier chapters or in his other book, The Clean Code, is that writing software is creative. So you need to be able to read other creative works in order to influence your creativity. And maybe if it's not reading other creative works, it's maybe consuming creative things, art or music. And he says that this can help with your creativity in your code. Time boxing, so the Pomodoro technique, this is something that can be useful, and I've used it in various times in my life. I have a stopwatch. I wear, I wear a watch, so I'll like clock out 25 minutes on my watch and then take a timer for 25 minutes. You don't let anything interfere you within those 25 minutes, and you get your work done. Or, you work on what's most important in your life at that moment or at your job. After the time is up, you take a 5-minute break, and then you go back after the 5 minutes, go back to working for 25 minutes, take a 5 break, and you alternate back and forth. And then every fourth interval, you take a longer break of Uncle Bob suggests like 30 minutes. So you're time boxing. And it's called tomatoes because the Pomodoro timer is like a tomato timer. So 25 minutes of work, 5-minute break. And that could be a good tool. I use it over 25 minutes if I'm really, really into a problem and I'm trying really hard to solve it. So I kind of go back and forth on it. Sometimes I'll do exactly 25. Sometimes I do less. Sometimes I do only 20 and then I take a break. But essentially you time box your time and you don't let anything interfere you when you are working on stuff. Avoidance. I mean, we're all going to want to avoid our problems. Maybe the task at hand is just looks too daunting, or maybe you just don't want to do it, so you avoid it. And what you end up doing is you do a priority inversion, Uncle Bob says, and this is where you put things at the top of your list that aren't high priority, thinking that they are high priority. And you're delaying the real task is really what you're doing. But he says that those are lies that we tell ourselves, and we shouldn't go down that path, just like we shouldn't go down blind alleys. And this is essentially going down rabbit holes and getting lost in a rabbit hole. You make a decision to go down a path and it's leading you nowhere. So the more invested you are in a path, the more you go down it with no end, and this could just lead to frustration and a lot of wasted time. And the motto here is that when you're in a hole, you stop digging. And I think Uncle Bob calls this the rule of holes. I want to get this right. Yeah, the rule of holes. When you're in a hole, you stop digging. When you find yourself going down a rabbit hole towards a solution, there's no end, you're not coming up with anything in a timely fashion, you got to stop digging. Get out of that hole and ask for help. No shame in doing that. Messes, these are actually worse than blind alleys. So this is where you see the way forward, but it's the wrong path. So it's not that you don't know what's going on. You're going down this rabbit hole. You don't know where it ends. In a software mess, you see the end, but you should not go down it. You should not go down it. But you oftentimes do because you think it's the only way out. These are inflection points where you should turn back. You should actually go back and rework some things or get some help. You need to look out for these points. If you start to think like, oh my gosh, I don't know if this is going to work, I should maybe go back, but that would be too much work. Whenever you start to think that, oh, going backwards would be too much work, I think that's a point where you need to reconsider and you should not keep going forward, or else you're going to get even more messy. Once you realize the mess, it's time to turn back. When the path out of the mess looks large and arduous, it's time to turn back. Notice what I said there, when the path out of the mess. Because it's better to go backwards, even if you think it's harder, than to keep going forwards down a solution that's going to lead you towards more of a mess. And to conclude, guys, your time is valuable. Honor your time by turning things down. Not Uncle Bob, but Gary Keller talks about in The One Thing how most successful people they say no to all these things. They say no to a bunch of ideas because the one time they say yes, they're so invested in it and they make it their one thing. Don't just say yes to all these meetings or engagements. Honor your time by turning things down and focusing on your work. Don't get caught going down rabbit holes and avoid those messes. I think that's going to do it. Yep. Thank you guys so much for listening. I really, really appreciate it. Be on the lookout for a new interview guest coming up very soon on the podcast. Thank you very much, guys, for listening. And I got the next book that I'm going to do after the Clean Coder, but we're close with the book. We're about maybe 2/3 of the way through. So thank you guys very much for listening to these videos. Hope you're getting a lot of value out of them. And I'll catch you guys in the next video. My name is Chris. This has been Chee-Tash. Take care, everybody.